There's something strange with this war.
The war in Iran is going along swimmingly.
A country that has achieved the impossible akin to the siege of St. Petersburg. And everyone uses the same argument to explain this.
Iranian drone.
The Shahed drone.
Iranian Shahed drone.
Shahed is the name that Iran has given to these strange delta wing-shaped drones.
They're cheap, mass-produced, packed with explosives, and sent on one-way missions.
Are you afraid of a U.S. invasion in your country?
No, we are waiting for them.
All of this is CSIS war games from 2 years ago when the stockpile was much higher. CSIS, again, had a war game where they concluded the United States would lose.
The problem is that this argument is lacking and deeper than that. In this video, we'll see how could Iran hold out this long, why the couple can't, and who really won the war.
And somebody made a good point. The actual impact of this in the near term, we can keep this piddly stuff going with Iran for, potentially another year or two. That's not the problem. The problem is that when the next president gets sworn in January 2029, he's going to get a briefing by the Indo-PACOM, by the people who are responsible for that region. And they're going to be like, look, sir, this is how many we got. This is how many that's going to come online. You could try and throw money at the problem. The Trump administration certainly is. But the reality is that if this X and Y happens, there's not a fucking thing you can do about it.
But first, we cannot start talking about Iran if we don't point out the lack of Israeli presence in the war effort against Iran. Israel. In the first weeks after October 7th, the IDF called up 360,000 reservists.
He's one of nearly 300,000 Israeli reservists called back home to serve in the IDF during the conflict.
The largest mobilization since the Yom Kippur War in the 1970s. 100,000 troops rotated at various points. 70,000 have remained on active duty ever since, and tens of thousands more have been sent home, only to be called back up, as many as 7 times. The aftermath of October 7th was, well, unexpected. Reservists reportedly showed up at 130% strength. People who hadn't even been called rushed to join. Unlike the famous Soviet line, everyone that has a rifle 4 follow behind him with ammunition. Some IDF units decided to decline their service as they didn't have enough weapons and equipment for them. Israel has fought long wars before. The occupation of Lebanon began as a massive invasion, but it rapidly diminished down to a few thousand troops. That was the exception. The rule for decades was short, overwhelming conflicts. A nation of only 10 million people was never designed to sustain a drawn-out fight. The logic was simple: punch fast, punch hard, go home. But this war isn't following that logic, and the reasons come down to one word: manpower. The average combat reservist in 2026 is now serving about 55 days a year. The Iran wars have raised that to 80, even 100 days for many units. Grinding the reserve force harder and harder is becoming a crisis on its own, as many would not have the time to go back to their jobs or family matters. As a result, there is a new political party in Israel now called the Reservists, run by former minister and reserve battalion commander Yoaz Handel. Their entire platform: draft reform and reservist welfare. The hardware can be rebuilt, the missiles can be restocked, but the manpower, well, it's fucked.
These Israeli reservists are adding their names to a declaration that says they'll no longer report for active duty.
I will not serve the dictator. I will not serve in a dictatorship.
Compulsory for most Jewish men and women above the age of 18, and many volunteer for reserve duty well into...
Refusal to serve puts the security of all Israeli citizens at risk. The government will not accept refusal. The government will act against it and will take all necessary steps to ensure our security and our future.
Eyal Zamir, a senior military figure, said it plainly: the army will collapse in on itself if the shortage is not addressed. Part of Israel's ability to punch above its weight has always been conscription. Everyone serves. Well, except the ultra-Orthodox. Remember about them, as you will see where the problem lies. When Israel was founded, almost exclusively by secular Jews, the Holocaust had left Jewish religious traditions a shell of their former self. David Ben-Gurion granted a small exemption to preserve what remained, a gesture of goodwill. That gesture has become a chasm. The ultra-Orthodox have enormous families, average of 6.5 children per woman. And that is the average. They are going at it like rabbits. Militarily, it is wasted potential.
For the first time in decades, the community known as the Haredim is being called to serve in the country's military. At the heart of the debate is the community's size. The Haredim's population has surged in recent decades.
As of 2024, their population is around 60% below 20 years old. They make up 14% of Israel's overall population, and they do not serve. In 2024, the Israeli Supreme Court ruled there was no legal basis for the exemption, but the ruling came at the worst possible time.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Saturday that he plans to run again for office in Israel's elections in November next year. The coalition relies on support from ultra-Orthodox allies, and he has been facing mounting criticism from the rest of Israeli society.
Israeli voters may be returning to the polls earlier than expected because of a bill submitted by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's ruling coalition on Wednesday.
Israel had just gone through 5 separate elections in 4 years. A 6th election was out of the question. Netanyahu entered an unenthusiastic coalition with 6 separate parties. 2 of them were ultra-Orthodox parties. He barely had a majority, no wiggle room. And to get the support of the ultra-Orthodox parties usually means one thing: guarantees to continue the military exemption. Netanyahu did try to work with them, but the war made this issue radioactive. And here's the kicker. The ultra-Orthodox parties are not involved in foreign policy. They do not push for any of the campaigns Israel has embarked on. They will ally with anyone, left or right, as long as they get their specific community issues sorted. But the other parties in the coalition, they are involved, and the wars have made the exemption untenable on both sides at once. On one side, you have the security hawks and religious Zionist groups, the base of Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir. Their communities make up maybe 10 to 12% of Israel's population, but they have accounted for roughly 45% of all combat deaths across the entire war. At the height of the violence, that number spiked above 60%. You can imagine their reaction to the ultra-Orthodox demand to be exempt from the war effort, and the ultra-Orthodox parties themselves have categorically refused to back down. As time marched on, it became increasingly clear that Netanyahu was stalling any formal legislation to codify the exemption. United Torah Judaism quit the coalition outright last summer. And now, in this 2026 election, it is too early to say if Netanyahu will stay in power. Because there's another faction in his former coalition that has been causing international crises since taking office.
It was intercepted near Cyprus on Monday, followed by global condemnation.
Canada has already imposed strict sanctions on Ben-Gvir.
Regime must be disbanded.
You remember those 2 parties that make up 45% of the war effort but only 10% of the population? The ones led by Itamar Ben-Gvir and Bezalel Smotrich. These 2 men are unlike anything seen in Israeli political leadership. They represent a hard pivot to the far right, for example. They consider Netanyahu's own Likud party unnecessarily accommodating to Palestinians. One controversial video made headlines when Ben-Gvir filmed himself standing over blindfolded activists detained from an aid flotilla headed to Gaza. He was smiling. The stunt drew a rebuke from the US ambassador. Even Netanyahu condemned the practice, ironically. It also angered countries in Europe that have been usually staunch supporters of Israel. As for Smotrich, he was put in charge of large swaths of policy on the West Bank, including settlements. He has wasted little time delivering for the hardliners. Construction is booming. More than 51,000 units approved since 2022, 103 entirely new settlements authorized. And if that is not enough, earlier this month he was prominently calling for Israel to permanently erase the lines distinguishing areas A, B, and C. Those are the areas of Palestinian governance. He is talking about annexation.
Bezalel Smotrich and Itamar Ben-Gvir, who you both mentioned, have a long history on the very margins or beyond the margins of Israeli law. And in fact, both of them were defined as like the KKK by the former Mossad director Tamir Pardo.
And then there is the violence. Repeated attacks by Israeli settlers have been an ongoing fact of life there for years. In the early days of Ben-Gvir taking office, he described settlers who torched Palestinian villages as, quote, sweet boys. The Israeli human rights group Yesh Din found that 94% of cases were closed without indictment whatsoever. Some of those attacks have even targeted the IDF. Settlers have attacked military vehicles, surveillance hardware, even personnel with pepper spray. In one instance, after attacking a mosque in the village of Deir Istia, the attackers left behind a Hebrew message for the IDF. It reads, "We are not afraid of Avi Bluth." Avi Bluth is the IDF Central Command Chief who had recently put out a denunciation of the violence. The message was basically saying, I dare you to do something. You can't do shit. Netanyahu knows about this. But if he does something, the coalition with Ben-Gvir is on the line. So the toxic friendship continues. It got to a point where in early March of 2026, Netanyahu received a report from a senior officer in IDF Central Command, along with the head of Shin Bet. The report stated that some 80% of violent incidents recorded on the West Bank were from Jewish extremist attacks on Palestinians. Israel's CAN network reported that the officer informed Netanyahu that the need to devote resources to Jewish terrorism has forced the IDF to cut back on arresting Palestinian terror suspects, putting the security of the state at risk. The Army's own command is telling the Prime Minister that part of his coalition has become not just a security problem, but apparently the major security problem in the West Bank. So what is the state of the IDF now? Well, as I said, it took more than it can show. While not actively participating in the Iranian war front except from airstrikes, it took the occasion to bully Lebanon after Big Daddy America entered the fray. The first incident happened during Operation Epic Fury.
I will say the war in Iran is going along swimmingly. We can do whatever we want. And it should be ending pretty soon. It was perfect. I mean, it's perfect. It was the power we have, our military. We have the most powerful military anywhere in the world. I built it 4 years, my first 4 years.
Part of the broader U.S. campaign against Iran, once Iranian air defense was officially degraded, F-15s were brought into the fight, specifically the F-15E Strike Eagle. Its main mission is ground attack. 3 of them were returning from an airstrike, heading back to Kuwait. That is where the footage comes from, a US fighter jet in flames moments before crashing down. You might say it could have been Saudi or Israeli. Well, have patience, dear viewer. Another footage surfaced from the same region, an F-15 in freefall. 2 different footages confirming the losses. 2 is already bad. But then a third video came out. An F-15 hit in the tail, then came the pilots. One video showed a US pilot intercepted by Kuwaiti locals who thought he was Iranian, until he told them he was American. A second video showed another US pilot inside a van. A third footage, more tame, but still confirming. The US Air Force Command released a statement. All 6 aircrew ejected safely. 6 crew members. That means 3 F-15E Strike Eagles, each with 2 pilots, 3 jets. The OSINT community went haywire. How could this happen? Wasn't Iranian air defense down? Was there a hidden weapon system? Ladies and lads, this is where you can guess the beginning of the madness in the US-Iran war. The official story at the time said it was merely friendly fire, and the US shooting down its own jets isn't unusual. Blue-on-blue casualties were expected during the Cold War. NATO estimated more than 10%. A recent example, December of 2024. 3 US Navy FA-18F Super Hornets were downed by a Gettysburg-class vessel amid an incoming Houthi attack. The ship mistook them for enemy anti-ship missiles. That happened because of recurring failures in the ship's friend or foe identification system. Issues with Link 16 data links. Misidentification despite known friendly air operations nearby. So what hit the 3 F-15Es over Kuwait? Look closely at the footage. The jet is fine 1 second, then small damage appears. That wasn't a Patriot missile. The pilot wouldn't have made it back. That was an air-to-air missile, a heat-seeking AM-9 Sidewinder, meaning they were shot down by another aircraft. The Kuwaiti FA-18 Hornet that was flying behind them. If this wasn't humiliating enough, a single Kuwaiti pilot downed them, who fired 3 missiles in a row, 2 aircraft away from being the first ace of this war. How did that happen? Remember, this happened during a large Iranian attack against US bases in Kuwait. Starting February 28th, Iranian missiles and drones were raining into the country. Those Kuwaiti pilots had been flying sorties nonstop, intercepting incoming attacks. They were in a state of stress, tension, crisis, lack of sleep. When they detected American jets flying in, they thought they were Iranian drones. Why didn't the friend or foe system work? Well, the US jets had been upgraded with a new system called EPAWSS. The Kuwaiti air defense was not configured to handle the new codes. In the fog of all-out war, confusion is guaranteed, and that is only the start. Some sources mention 2 more F-15s downed over Iran by enemy air defense, confirming that Iran still has capabilities. OSINT Defender reported that 2 US F-15E Strike Eagles crashed over southwestern Iran. No official story yet, but US rescue teams were activated. US Central Command denied it. But then came Iranian footage. What you are seeing is Iranian published footage of the downing of an F-15 or Strike Eagle over Iraq, near Basra International Airport. Now look at Iran. They lost a Yak-130 over Tehran to an Israeli F-35I, the first downed aircraft by an F-35 on March 4th. Their navy was allegedly obliterated by the US. Note the use of quotes. Before the war, Iran's navy was built for first-line defense in the Persian Gulf and the Gulf of Oman. 18,000 personnel, 60 combat vessels, 7 frigates, 4 Shahid Soleimani-class corvettes, 20 patrol ships and fast attack craft. A drone carrier, the Shahid Bahri, commissioned in February 2025, 3 Tarek-class attack submarines. 2 Fateh-class coastal submarines, their main base at Bandar Abbas. Beautiful navy by sanctioned nation standards. In flames. On February 28th, as part of Operation Epic Fury, U.S. airstrikes targeted air defense radars at Bandar Abbas. Then the naval base. You would think Iran is done for by then, as President Trump stated, but you forgot one thing. Iran's navy was never designed for direct warfare, and Iran has been focusing elsewhere. On drones, Iran has a plethora of drones, but the most dreaded drone for the US and its allies? FPV drones. In one propaganda video, an Iranian soldier says he is prepared for a US invasion. He shows his gear kit. The FPV drone is central to it. Assuming every unit has a drone operator, and the US is not prepared for drone warfare, it will be a massacre. Many units in the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps have gone through extensive drone operation training for 2 years now, likely trained by Russian veterans. As seen in Ukraine, most Cold War tactics from 10 years ago are now completely obsolete. You might say US air defense is sufficient. Think again. The US is running dry on ammunition, faster than it ever predicted. Any country in history that relied on rapid, overwhelming force, it rarely ends well. We are not even scratching the surface. So the question remains, who is really the victor of this war?
Now, President Trump is in Europe for the G7 summit, where he's talking about a signed memorandum agreement to end the war in Iran.
The Memorandum of Understanding between the US and Iran is a white flag dipped in ink, and it is an epic failure of war planning and execution from Washington without precedent. We are not talking about a minor setback. We are talking about the complete clusterfuck of what modern warfare actually looks like. The United States prepared for 1991, Iran prepared for 2026. And the gap between those two things is a chasm filled with burning Patriot missiles, empty stockpiles, and a generation of military planners who will spend their careers explaining how they lost to a country that had no air force and a navy that looks like it came from a Mad Max movie. So let us count the cash that Moscow and Beijing are making while Washington burns its own house down. Analysts have pointed out a logistics problem that occurred during the 12-day war. A problem that Iran learned from. Contrary to its adversaries, you see, Iran realized something that the US military-industrial complex refuses to accept. The United States cannot drag a war out beyond the shock and awe phase. Not anymore. The first days are devastating with its bombing runs after an established air supremacy followed by rolling tanks and infantry. After that, well, look at Iraq and Afghanistan to understand. Shock and awe works until you run out of shock, and then you just have awe. Awe at how fast your expensive toys dipping into the desert. That is why the US is now facing a sophisticated, asymmetric attrition campaign. Iran is exhausting Western air defense capabilities while preserving its own strategic depth, a strategy of quality being beaten by quantity, but not the way you think. Basically, Iran focused on sending drones and ballistic missiles that do not need much accuracy. They are cheaper. They send them at targets, and they expect the expensive, hyper-accurate air defense systems of the Western sphere to exhaust themselves with the volume of attacks just to end up gone. Basic logistics, basic economics. The attacker benefits from this advantage. The defender needs to ensure that every incoming missile is intercepted rapidly. That eats up a lot of ammunition. In the first few days of the war, the United States and its allies burned through more than 800 Patriot missiles. You might ask, what is the problem with that? Well, Lockheed Martin, the manufacturer making the Patriot missiles, only produced 620 PAC-3 MSE missiles in all of 2025. Do the math, that entire year's production was burned down in a few days of war. And as some of you might have guessed, they must have been firing those interceptors in automatic mode at decoys. In the first 48 hours, Iran fired over 1,200 projectiles, but 70% of them were drones. Gulf countries proved disastrously trigger-happy. In the first 96 hours, they fired 618 Patriot interceptors, 15% of their stockpile. By day 16, that number had reached 1,285 THAAD. Ukrainian officers were brought in to train Gulf crews on basic threat assessment. The problem, US production cannot keep up.
And just to give you an idea of what it means now for choices by the United States, President Zelensky, while he was in the Oval Office, said that just to get Ukraine through the summer, they need 300 Patriots to be given to them, which would be almost half of the stockpile that currently exists just in the U.S. inventory alone. Also, for those who are complaining about these numbers include the replenishment that have come since the beginning of the war. Just again, to show you all how disastrous this has been.
Lockheed Martin produces just 96 THAAD interceptors per year. The Gulf burned through more than a decade of production in 2 weeks. You know it is bad when Ukraine, already at war, agreed to help the Gulf countries train their crews to manage threat assessment and avoid overkill. And do not even get me started on the US warships. Their sailors are also trigger happy. As a Ukrainian officer told The Times, quote, "For example, they used SM-6 missiles, a very good anti-missile, a $6 million one, to shoot down a mere Shahed costing $70,000. They fired that SM-6 missile 310 times by day 4 of the war. 6 days in, 431 were expended. A 20% expenditure rate, madness."
Madness and stupidity.
And this madness is heightened when the missile production rate by Raytheon is currently at 125 per year. Let that sink in. Now, remember when I said Israel could not actively participate in the war except for bullying Lebanon? There is another reason. The David system and the Arrow systems, part of the Iron Dome umbrella, are running critically low. 54% losses for the David system. The Arrow system has burned 122 missiles out of its 150, all that 16 days in. So where does that leave us? The US cannot sustain this, the Gulf cannot sustain this, Israel cannot sustain this, and Iran. Well, Iran is also bleeding, but Iran planned for a long war. Iran planned to bleed slower, and Iran had help. Help from two very large friends who are not losing any aircraft, not depleting any stockpiles, and not sending their sons to die in the desert. I'm talking about Russia and China. And here's where things get interesting. Iran realized it could not defeat the US Navy in a conventional fight, so it did not try. Instead, Iran focused on drones and kamikaze speedboats. Numerous speedboats, coupled with aerial drones and anti-ship capabilities on Keshem Island and along the coast of the Strait of Hormuz, made it possible to take out any ship attempting to pass through. And while the United States carried out operations along the coast to destroy those drone production and launch facilities, it still could not lift the blockade. Reports of damage to their navy continue to come in. But here's the twist. Iran's kamikaze craft and anti-ship missiles are effective, but only because Chinese and Russian satellites provide targeting data. Without them, Iran is blind. The Islamic Republic is not a superpower. It is a proxy, and its proxies are now being directed from Beijing and Moscow. And with the economic and military help of Russia and China using their satellites, and the recent open border policy to help Iran carry out trade with Pakistan, it seems the war will probably drag on. But here's another layer to this mess. Iran is not just defending itself. Iran is extracting a toll, a literal toll. Ships wishing to pass safely through the Strait of Hormuz need to either run the gauntlet or negotiate with intermediaries linked to the IRGC and pay a fee. The fee varies, but there are reports of the IRGC asking for as much as $1 per barrel. That is $2 million for a very large crude carrier laden with 2 million barrels. Some payments have been made in yuan, but increasingly the IRGC are asking for payment in cryptocurrency. Nice little business model they have going there, but it is indeed weird how more and more countries are starting to rely more on cryptocurrencies. Like Trump, for example, which needs a documentary in and on its own. So what do the Gulf states do? They watch their stockpiles burn, they watch their oil exports get held hostage, and they watch the United States, their supposed guarantor, struggle to send them replacement interceptors. And when trust disappears, diversification begins. The war has accelerated Gulf states' efforts to diversify their defense partnerships, their export routes, and their overall strategic orientation. The UAE and Saudi Arabia, already regional competitors, were affected differently.
But somebody, the UAE needed help, and obviously the United States was busy losing. So it couldn't provide help, which was ironic because the UAE and Bahrain and Qatar and Saudi Arabia and Kuwait have been spending billions of dollars every year paying the United States so that the United States would defend them. And then what did they get? They got bombed without any real assistance from the United States.
But even Saudi Arabia is looking elsewhere. They are actively trying to find alternatives to their oil exports, doing so with Oman by building pipeline infrastructure. And with Israel through Jordan, the Gulf states are hedging. They are looking at China. They are looking at Russia. They are looking at anyone who can offer security guarantees that do not come with a side order of Patriot missile shortages, and China, of course, is happy to oblige. China brokered the Saudi-Iran normalization in 2023. China is the largest trading partner for almost every Gulf state. China does not demand regime change. China does not lecture on human rights. China just trades and trades and trades. While the US burns through its missile stockpile, China burns through its trade agreements, and those trade agreements last longer than any interceptor. Now we get to Russia. And I need to be honest with you, the more I delved into Ukraine in the last video, specifically the Russian economy, the more I started to find something that did not add up. The Russian economy was supposed to collapse under the weight of sanctions through the Ukrainian war, but it did not. Instead, it stayed stable, and then it surged. So why? The Russian economy bumped up shortly after Putin made a deal with Iran and started using the Caspian Sea more and more for trade with Iran. Russia had issues with Ukraine gaining Patriot missile capabilities for its air defense. Not only that, the procurement of sophisticated weaponry was also an issue for Putin. But since the Iran war started, the global Western supply of sophisticated weaponry tanked hard, and with it, supplies of anti-air defense and offensive ordnance. Now, Ukrainian airspace is more open than ever, and not only that, Russia built its entire 2026 budget around oil sales. At about $60 a barrel, the Iran war pushed oil past $120 a barrel. You see what I mean? That one shift basically carried the Russian economy. Some even say it saved it, giving the government the money it needs to keep funding the war in Ukraine, just when Western sanctions were supposed to deal a crippling blow. As pointed out earlier, Russia was providing satellite imagery for Iran, thus improving accuracy for their drone and ballistic strikes and prolonging the war. But it gets even better for Moscow. The energy crisis triggered by the Strait closure has greatly increased the attractiveness of Russia's power of Siberia to gas pipeline to China. The project would consolidate mutually beneficial economic interdependence between Moscow and Beijing. The pipeline is massive. It would carry 50 billion cubic meters of gas per year from Russia to China. And with Europe closing its doors, China is the only buyer that matters. The war has accelerated that project. Russia gets a guaranteed customer. China gets guaranteed energy. And the United States gets nothing except a headache and a depleted arsenal. Russia might not win the war in Ukraine in the immediate future, but Russia is surviving, and survival in geopolitics is often the only victory that matters. Now we look at China. China's position is more interesting. It called for peace and took a diplomatic stance, contrary to the White House decision-making that looked more like improvisation than real diplomatic expertise. Now, not only Russia was providing help with equipment and satellite imagery, but also China, sharing location data with Iran through its Beidou satellite system. Not only that, Chinese companies were selling radar parts and electronic equipment to Iran. While it is not confirmed yet, it might be because of that an F-35 was shot down over Iran. Yes, an F-35 was shot down, the gem of military equipment. Reportedly, it was an infrared missile from an infantry element inside Iran that shot it down after spotting the F-35 running a ground-level mission. And before that, the US lost hundreds of aircraft that were idle on the tarmac, some of those US. Fleet suffered multiple hits to its E-3 Sentry inventory. 2 E-3 Sentry airframes have been lost or written off, with an additional aircraft heavily damaged. And keep in mind that before the war, the US had only 16 of those. Meanwhile, China is learning everything it can about a possible war with Taiwan, seeing how the United States is burning through its supply in Iran, and the withdrawal of Patriot systems stationed in Korea despite the latter's protests. So expect another war, this time in the Pacific. But here's the kicker. Just last week, something happened that no one saw coming. China, the biggest buyer of oil in the world, stopped buying. The global oil market, which was already on fire from the war, was supposed to collapse. Everyone expected prices to go even higher, but they did not, because China, the largest client, simply stepped away from the table, and the market went haywire. How did they do it? Simple. They had been preparing years of energy-based change, transition to coal, clean energy investment, and so on. And when the Strait of Hormuz crisis reached a fever pitch, they just stopped buying. The global oil price, which should have gone through the roof, stayed stable. In fact, some analysts say China's move actually saved the global economy from collapse because if they had kept buying at those prices, the cost would have been passed on to everyone else. But China's decision to stop buying held the price down, and whether it was through kindness or calculation, only the Chinese could resolve the equation. China is winning because it calculated the cost and found it acceptable. So China is winning the public image battle while absorbing a manageable energy hit. And here's another reason it pushes hard for a ceasefire, even while helping Iran hold out. China wants the war to stop so it can lock in its gains. It wants to replace the US as the main trading partner and trusted nation to various nations across the world. And it is working. So where does that leave us? After 3 months, the war has not produced any obvious winners. Iran's economy, already in a dire state, is near collapse, with its 300 billion plus losses and already an obvious puppet state to both Moscow and Beijing. The United States and its allies in the Gulf are rapidly depleting their stockpiles of ammunition, whether offensive or defensive, with the first having a diplomatic disaster on its hand with the loss of trust with the later and other countries. And Israel is going through a rough economic, societal, and diplomatic shuffle, which deserves a video on its own. So now, Iranian IRGC commanders come out one after another, replacing the decapitated heads from US strikes as if nothing happened. The United States is rapidly ramping up its military-industrial capabilities, albeit it will take years to cover the cost. The Gulf countries are actively trying to find alternatives to their oil exports. So is the Gulf region condemned to return to the same script as the last 2 years? Ceasefire after ceasefire without a final winner? And that brings us to the Memorandum of Understanding. On June 17th, Memorandum of Understanding was signed in Switzerland between the United States and Iran. 14 points. The Western media called it peace. They called it a historic breakthrough. They called it a win for Trump. But read the fine print. The points are deliberately vague. A transitional framework, not a final peace treaty.
Israel will stop its aggressive genocidal bombing campaign and occupation of South Lebanon. And Israel has basically said, we're not going to do that.
Every major issue was pushed into a 60-day window. And within days, the whole thing began to unravel. Lebanon was Clause 1, cessation of hostilities on all fronts. But Israel was not a party. The same day the MOU was signed, Netanyahu ordered intensified strikes on Hezbollah. Then a separate US-brokered ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon was signed, which excluded Iran entirely. Now there are 2 ceasefires. They contradict each other, and both sides claim the other is violating. Iran walked out of the first round of direct talks in Switzerland within 80 minutes. Trump threatened more military action while the talks were happening. The Iranian delegation left. The process was stalled before it even started. Both sides lost, but Russia and China, they lost nothing. Russia got $160 billion in oil revenue. It got the power of Siberia 2 pipeline accelerated. China got the peacemaker image. It got Taiwan invasion lessons written in real time. It got Gulf states diversifying away from the US and toward Beijing. The West bled, the East profited, the belligerents burned. Moscow and Beijing counted the cash. And when the flames die down, they will be the ones standing. The MOU is not the end of the war. It is the end of the illusion that the United States can win a protracted conflict against a determined adversary with access to Chinese technology, Russian satellites, and an endless supply of cheap drones. The war is not over. The outcome already is. Russia and China won. Everyone else lost, and the only thing left to do is wait for the next round.